This just in, BYU in Provo, Utah is struggling to contain an outbreak of armpit crabs. You heard that right, armpit crabs. Brigham Young University is a private research institution created for and by followers of Joseph Smith, or the Jesus Christ Church of Latter-day Saints. Joseph Smith was a pilgrim who insisted his invisible sky daddy needed him to marry at least 40 different women all at the same time, many of whom were already married, one of whom was only 14 years old. Is anyone really shocked that according to Mormons, everything you do with your dick can still be abstinence if you gaslight yourself enough? Annyeong, hello, my name is Faith. It is I. Not Faith Hill, not Faith Evans, Faith motherfucking Bowman, and welcome to the first ever inaugural episode of Cults, Magic, and Misinformation. It's Wednesday. It's October 26th, year of our Lord, 2022. And today, I'm going to be talking about sex with a sex expert, Erica Smith, who invented a curriculum called Purity Culture Dropout. And I am so excited, but I'm also literally sick and literally just really tired. So my personality as I record this is I kind of feel like I had a whole bunch of those Greyhound cocktails, you know, the ones with like Red Bull and vodka at the same time. Like, I don't know if I want to jump up and down on the couch and run some laps or if I want to lay down and take a nap. It's a very odd combination of impulses. But anyways, I just need to do my anthropology nerd thing and set the stage for this exquisite conversation by reminding us all that human beings are incredibly fucking stupid. We contradict ourselves all the time. We still have the same cranial capacity as we did thousands of years ago. Like, we really have not been evolving as fast as our own technology. And it's a lot easier for us to weave elaborate webs of abstract thought that make us feel good about ourselves on paper, but it's a lot harder for us to walk the walk and follow through on a lot of the religious nonsense that we try to force on ourselves as societies, right? So I just want to take a minute to explain like how backwards our understanding of sex and human desire has always been. I want to remind you of a term called hysteria. And I'm going to be reading from a website called verywellmind.com that provides researched and fact-checked information about psychology, mental health, etc. So according to Verywellmind, hysteria is a term often used to describe emotionally charged behavior that seems excessive or out of control. Like nowadays when people say that somebody is hysterical, it means that they're being disproportionately emotional for the situation. But for the longest time, the term hysteria was a common medical diagnosis specifically for women. And it wasn't even removed from the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, until the 80s. And hysteria was viewed as a very woman-specific psychological disorder as far back as 1900 BCE. So almost 2,000 years before the birth of Christ. Ancient Egyptians first described the condition of hysteria as being caused by spontaneous uterus movement or a wandering uterus. Like, they literally thought a woman's uterus would like float where it wasn't supposed to go in the body. And to treat hysteria, Egyptians would place bad smelling or other scented substances near the woman's vulva or face, depending on where they thought her uterus was. The word hysteria comes from Greek hystera, which means uterus. And it wasn't until the early 1600s, like 1600 AD, after the death of Christ, that the focus switched and people started thinking like, hey, maybe mental health symptoms don't come from the uterus, they happen in the brain, and maybe people with penises can also react in ways that are disproportionate to what's really happening around them. This concept of hysteria as a mental disorder helped form the field of psychoanalysis. French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot utilized hypnosis to treat women suffering from hysteria, and Sigmund Freud, while working on the case of Anna O., a young woman experiencing symptoms of hysteria, used his work from that specific case to help lead the development of psychoanalytic therapy. Literally, Anna found that simply talking about her problems with a therapist had a major impact on her well-being. She dubbed this treatment the talking cure, and it is still referred to as talk therapy to this day. Hysteria as a term for a legit psychological disorder is now an outdated term, but when it was considered a real mental disorder and diagnosis, the symptoms included blindness, emotional outbursts, hallucinations, histrionic behavior, which basically means being overly dramatic or excitable, increased suggestibility, loss of sensation, fainting or passing out, having epileptic-like seizures, increased pain sensation, or muscle spasms. Essentially, hysteria or wandering uterus was a fake mental health condition that explained away any behaviors or symptoms that made men uncomfortable, basically. Because you have to remember that during this time, people thought sex was only for men, sex was only for reproduction, and people believed it was physically, biologically impossible for women to even experience pleasure. Heterosexual and homosexual was coined by a Hungarian journalist, Karl Maria Kurtbeny, as a way to describe sexual deviance. Like when the word heterosexual was first used, it was used as a slur to refer to people who were satanic and disgusting for having sex purely for sex's sake. Does that make sense? Literally, for the longest time, people thought that sexual intercourse was for reproduction and reproduction only. And if you orgasmed, if you did it just for funsies, if you were just practicing for a baby, you were a freak of nature. You were deplorable. You were a heterosexual. So I'm also fascinated by the fact that even though the United States claims to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, we still don't have federally mandated sex education. We're still out here letting people spread around life-threatening STDs because this is too scary for us to talk about openly, because children are innocent little flowers, and if you teach them how to protect themselves from sexual predators, you're corrupting them somehow. I'm just personally so glad to be out of a high control group, a totalitarian cult that told me the only thing I would ever accomplish in this life would be saving my virginity until marriage. I'm just so glad I don't live in that indoctrination anymore. And even though I know that a lot of people who might find this podcast still believe that pleasure is sinful, still believe that sex is not meant to be enjoyed, it's meant to be offered up to God as an act of some sort of ritual obedience, it's my pleasure to introduce all of you to Erica Smith. Erica Smith has her master's degree in education. She's been a sex educator since 2000. She offers one-on-one sessions as well as group classes. She is a speaker, a writer, a consultant. She has a strong social media presence where she posts some of the best infographics debunking sex education myths that I've ever seen. So I'm just scrolling through right now, and I want to read you an infographic that she created called The Truth About Hymens. I think this is the perfect introduction to the type of conversation we're going to be having right now. So for example, myth: hymens are a solid piece of tissue that obstruct the vaginal opening. They break or pop the first time a penis enters the vagina. Reality: a hymen is a ring of tissue around the inside of the vagina. Think of it like a lifesaver candy. They're not solid, allowing menstrual blood and fluid to exit the body. The tissue is highly elastic, and any kind of penetration can disrupt them, including tampons or fingers. They don't break or pop. Tear is most accurate. Another myth: The presence of the hymen determines a person's virginity. An intact hymen equals no sexual penetration has occurred, and a torn hymen equals sexual penetration has occurred. Reality, LMAO, she types, laugh my ass off. This is a patriarchal lie used to control our bodies. Hymens can tear from any inserted objects, not just a penis. Vigorous exercise can cause tears too. They also begin naturally wearing away, tearing, thinning, and developing holes as we age. Now, if you grew up in intensely religious communities or a country whose culture is still steeped in old religious superstitions, this is mind-blowing information. I know people who have been disowned from their families because their father did a hymen check to make sure that they were still a virgin, and they had torn their hymen on a bicycle seat, and they were blamed for being a whore. Like, there are people who conduct honor killings and vaginal mutilation who still believe in these myths about how a woman's hymen works. I can feel my voice getting louder the longer I talk about this, because it's mind-blowing how much false information there is around sex and what it means to be a virgin, what that says about whether or not you're going to have a good time in the afterlife or be tortured forever. God is fine with seeing his children suffer, I suppose. So if you are also flabbergasted by the people who claim to follow a peace-loving, sex-positive, barefoot socialist called Jesus, if you're baffled by how those same people can literally send bomb threats to children's hospitals for providing gender-affirming care, then, just imagine you're sitting with me, holding my hand, talking to my friend Erica Smith over Zoom, like I did a few months ago. If you listened to the intro trailer for this podcast, I've already told you that I'm a little bit feral and the audio quality is not the best. I was using my headphones for this first ever Zoom interview, so it does kind of sound like I'm calling over the phone into my own podcast. But I don't know, I feel like it still kind of works. I just want to give Erica a chance to describe why she got into this work. We're not really going to be deep diving into how to give yourself this therapy. She's literally got the most affordable, the most accessible resources you could hope for. So definitely be checking out her website. So without further ado,
my name is Erica, and I am a sexuality educator, and I've been working in sex education for over 20 years now. But in the last couple years, I have really focused on giving sex ed to folks who were raised in very fundamentalist religions, or cults, as people often refer to their own experiences. And it's not because I was raised in a similar background. I actually do not have any background being raised in a religious family. My family is very, what I call casually Christian. We celebrate Christmas and Easter, but we never go to church. And I grew up with a pretty healthy attitude and view of sexuality. And in my work, I was always observing the people who wanted to silence sex educators and silence the conversation around sex ed were always evangelical Christians, by and large, at least where I grew up in the middle of central Pennsylvania. And I worked in abortion care for a little bit, and those were the folks that were the loudest and also the most violent and threatening, not wanting us to do our work.
Wow, and violent, you said.
Yeah, violent. I was actually, this is a short tangent, but when I worked in abortion care, it was during a time where clinic bombings were happening a lot and threats were happening a lot. So, it became clear that giving people reproductive health care and sex education was a very touchy topic. And then I also worked in HIV prevention and AIDS, AIDS activism and HIV care. And we would lose our funding again and again to abstinence-only curriculums. And the folks behind the abstinence-only curriculums were the religious right and the conservative Republicans. And so I always knew that there was this, force of people who really wanted to censor the information, and the folks growing up in those cultures were being very affected by not having access to information. So the reason that I started working specifically with people who were raised in purity culture, and I'm just going to define that loosely as like a very restrictive set of gendered expectations around sexuality that usually disproportionately affect women, women as sexual gatekeepers, women as having to be pure and not, keep virginity, quote unquote, virginity as long as possible. The only acceptable expression of sexuality was inside a heterosexual marriage. So folks raised in those environments were becoming more and more vocal about how that had really messed them up in terms of sexuality. And so I was like, this is an audience, this is a group of people that could really use targeted information. And I, like, having been in the sexuality field, I have a master's degree in human sexuality education. I was like, I know a lot of things, and I would like to help people by delivering the information in a really trauma-informed and sensitive way, where there's no shame because you don't know something, no shame because you haven't experienced something, because shame is literally the last thing that anyone needs. Shame is part of the problem. So that is why I decided, even though it wasn't my background and my experience, that I like to provide sex ed to the people that I think need it the most and whose lives can be most radically transformed by it. And so far, this has been like really, really awesome work, because I have worked with folks from, all major world religions and lots of, I don't know a lot about religion, and I've learned a lot about religion in this work. The things that people tell me and the backgrounds they have, a lot of it was totally new to me. But it has been really incredible, just offering anything you want to know about sex or anything you want to talk about in a non-judgmental, shame-free, queer inclusive, medically accurate, like no bullshit space. And that's really what I strive to do.
That's awesome. I kind of was expecting you to have personal experience, because in the religious space, or like to be self-motivated to like heal your own trauma, or just like hit back at people who gave you purity culture information. But that almost makes me like trust and respect you more, that you were like, look, I don't know what they're teaching you, but this is violent, this is problematic, this is taking all our funding, this needs to be addressed, even though that wasn't your background. That speaks volumes to me, really.
Thank you. One of the things that I find kind of cool and really interesting is that, like, the clients that I work with are people who would have been actively against me and my work for a long time. So,
wow.
I work with folks who were like, I used to protest abortion clinics. Yeah, I used to preach against queer people. And like, I am someone who is a queer woman. I've been out for a long, long time, and I've always been in this field. So my clients are people who were like, I would have, they were people who were raised to not trust me and raised to actively harm folks like me. But I know it's not because they're bad. It's because of absolute brainwashing. And so the people that I work with, I have so much love and respect for them, because I know that it's so hard to get from point A to even being willing to engage with my work.
Wow. So I guess my next question would be, so you were just always interested in sex and sexuality? Like, you've never wanted a different major? You just kind of always knew that you were going to be a sex ed teacher? That's the gist that I'm getting from you.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I feel like my age and the time frame is important here. So I was in high school in the 90s. And when I graduated high school in 1997, sex education wasn't like a career path. Nobody was like, I want to be a sex educator. All I knew was that I wanted to major in women's studies, which in most universities is now like gender studies or women and gender studies. But at the time, it was women's studies. I went to Penn State University, which was like my backyard school. And while I was there, in my women's studies major, I found that I was most interested in the classes that had to do with sexuality, and not just like the practical aspects of sexuality and the medical aspects, but the social and political aspects of sexuality. And that was my kind of feminism, was like addressing that stuff. And that's where my like activism started. And so my college roommates and classmates and we would put on sex ed events and talk a lot about sexuality and pleasure and all kinds of things. And that is really where I got into it. So I never did have, I didn't have a clear idea of what my career path would look like. And it's especially, 20 years ago, you can't picture that social media is going to exist and be a platform to like, because even though I've been in the sex education field, I've only had a public facing role for a few years. Like I was always just kind of quietly in the trenches until about 2019, when I really started to like do more public facing work.
I'm so glad you have too. Like, I'm just so grateful that social media makes so many more new things possible and makes like entire careers possible now that weren't even an option before. So I guess I'm really excited to have you be one of my first guests on this podcast, because, so correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes when faced with what feels like oceans of people who are personally invested, almost like to an animalistic level, to like tear you down, tell you you're wrong, tell you you're like a vehicle for Satan, like it's more than just, it feels like sex education and even just fighting for people to feel safe in their own bodies and to have autonomy over their own choices. It feels like ideological warfare. It feels like fighting the boogeyman or fighting one of those multi-headed monsters that grows 3 more heads every time you chop one off.
Yeah.
So like, do you feel, how much of your energy, I guess, do you feel like you spend addressing haters and people who don't agree with you versus just focusing on the population that wants your help?
Yeah, that's a great question. And those haters and or forces against sex ed, they come and go in waves. So in the time that I've been in this work, I have never felt as threatened as I currently do.
Wow.
And, even like I said, a long time ago in abortion care, it could be very scary. Not that it isn't now. It's also like so much is happening in abortion care. But as a sex educator, especially somebody that has a public face, it's been really terrifying in the past calendar year because of the growing conversation among conservatives that want to paint sex educators, especially those of us who work with children, as groomers and pedophiles. It is one of the most heinous accusations I have ever personally faced. Thinking that anyone, I know that working with children and teaching them about their bodies and sexuality protects them from victimization, and it gives them empowerment. It gives them agency over their own bodies. But the conversation has been twisted to where now anyone who talks to young people about sexuality is being accused of being some kind of pedophile. And so it's really scary to know that. I have currently all of my social media accounts, including my professional one, are on private because of hopefully by the time this podcast comes out, it won't be an issue. But I also work with transgender youth through a gender clinic for children. So there's a massive, massive conversation in politics and pop culture right now about transgender children and people thinking that those of us who work with them are evil humans and we're groomers. So the gender clinic I work for has been under attack. And earlier this year, I was supposed to teach a sex ed unit to middle schoolers at a school that I had presented at many times. And some of the parents Googled me and complained to the school and would have caused a major fuss if they hadn't gotten rid of me. So I lost that job. I have taken great pains to like cover my internet tracks so that like my home address can't be found. It is really scary. And I will tell you that like I don't spend any time fighting with people. I don't spend any time reading negative comments or addressing those folks. So like if anyone does want to write to me and tell me that I'm going to hell, like I literally don't give a shit because I don't believe in your hell. So like you can say that what you want, you know what I mean? Like you can tell me that I'm against, that I'm ruining biblical sexuality because I don't give a shit. What is biblical sexuality? I don't care. So like those kind of comments don't affect me. They don't scare me. It's just the people that I know are out there that are like very much tied to fringe groups and extremist groups. Those are the people that I worry about. But I don't spend any time. I'm not an arguing, like I don't use social media to fight with people. Like if someone comes on my page and wants to talk shit, I literally just block and delete. So yeah, it's a wild time to be in this work. And it just really goes to show for me how people view this information as like really powerful. Like why wouldn't you want people to know about their bodies?
Hey, this is Editor Faith jumping back in to say that Erica was completely correct. By the time this podcast is dropping, her profiles are now back on public. They are not private. You can browse them, peruse them without having to request to be a follower. So definitely check out her socials.
Yeah. I mean, I really feel like we are talking to each other from like opposite ends of the universe almost, because I know that the way that I was raised, sex was painted to be the entire purpose of your life. Like you're literally a number, you're like a faithless peon. The only reason you're here on earth is so that you can make God happy by waiting until your arranged marriage to have sex with the same person in the way that God wants you to have it. And if you don't do that, then you're repeating the fall. Like you're repeating the apple being eaten in the Garden of Eden, and you're like re-traumatizing God in a way. Like it's almost like sex becomes the most important thing about you more than your personality or your goals or your dreams or even the experience you have in this physical life. And it's crazy trying to make that switch and feel, for me personally, and feel okay with being quote unquote selfish and literally just enjoying my meat suit and just enjoying being a human being with another human being. Like that's allowed. And it's like, and it's okay to enjoy that. So I guess like, I don't know. I'm just hoping that the people who listen to this can feel like they have permission to ask more questions, look up their own sex education. I know that I haven't personally, to full disclosure, I haven't taken your purity culture dropout course yet, but I plan to. I started with a workbook to sort of inventory where I am right now. And even that, just as you said it would in the introduction, that became really emotional and kind of like twisted my brain in knots in a way that I had, like, just the questions on that survey, like, what do you, for example, like, what do you consider sex? Is it always penetrative, penis and vagina, or is like humping, or like, you know, not, I mean, I'm sure we can get hella details, but like, exactly. It's like, at what point is something sex or not. And it's like the way you answer that question reveals a lot about what you ideologically believe about like the history of sex and whether gay people are valid or not, whether queer people across the spectrum of sexuality and gender are valid or not. So I guess like for people who might be nervous to tackle this subject in their own therapy or in their own life, I'm just wondering if you personally just want to riff for a few minutes on why this work is so fulfilling for you, some of the things clients have said after doing work with you. So a little more about that.
Yeah. So first of all, I definitely want you to know that I have had folks do intensive one-on-one work with me who are from the Unification Church. So,
great.
Yeah. So I've had at least one client that I did a lot of intensive work on it. And I have a friend who came from the Unification Church, which is actually how I knew about it way before I even started Purity Culture Dropout, because I knew her background. When I read about you and your background, I was like, oh yeah, like I unfortunately know a lot about this one. I have worked with people from many different places in life. I have worked with folks who have never had a partnered sexual experience, so people that would consider themselves virgins. I have worked with people who have been married to the same person for 10, 15 years. I've worked with queer people. I've mostly worked with women. I have worked with men less, but still, I mean, definitely men who are deeply affected by the purity culture messaging that they are just like evil, horny, terrible people. And the reason that it's worth doing this work is I have definitely seen major just shedding of shame and really bad narratives that people were taught to believe about themselves. And that opens up the doors for writing your own story about your sexuality that is completely of your making, that is not about what someone else thinks you should do, thinks you should be, not about a prescriptive set of rules that somebody else thinks you should live by. And I know that's one of the hardest things for people coming out of a fundamentalist religion is folks are used to rules. And a lot of the clients I get are like, I was such a good Christian girl. I followed rules all the time. And I need to know what the new rules are now that I don't believe this stuff. And I'm like, well, and I wrote this in the workbook. I'm like, I'm not going to give you new rules. You got to make your own. And then you can live by what feels good to you. And that can be so fucking hard when hopefully I can say fuck on your podcast.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, go for it.
It can be so fucking hard when you've been taught not to trust yourself ever. So, and I am not a therapist. I'm not a clinician. I don't do mental health work. So I think sometimes the work of trusting yourself has to be done separately. And then the work I do, which is helping you build confidence around your sexuality and sexual decision-making, kind of works hand in hand with that. So I do encourage people to first interrogate the beliefs you were given, which is part of what the Sexual Values Workbook does. It's like, we're going to start with some of the major tenets that you were probably taught, like sex should only happen within marriage. And there's only one valid expression of your sexuality, which is with your, Christian husband or wife, and that virginity is very important and that sex shouldn't be for pleasure. And like, it can be really, really hard to reject those beliefs. A lot of people I've worked with are terrified of letting them go because there's part of their brain that's like, but what if? But what if it's actually true? And if I reject it, what will happen to me? But the beautiful thing is when people reject it, then they're like, oh, nothing happened. I'm still here. I'm still fine. I've even worked with a lot of clients who have been terrified to have penis and vagina sex. Just that sex act specifically is very scary to them. I've had a lot of clients, women in particular, like cis women, who have partners and have done a lot of other sexual activities, but they cannot get over this hurdle in their brains that having penis and vagina sex will change their value as a human. And so we do a lot of processing about like, why do you believe this? What do you think is actually true? What are your fears about it? What is the worst thing that could happen? Would you be able to handle the worst thing that could happen? For a lot of people, it's like pregnancy, or the person will leave me eventually. And it's always something that a person can handle. And then I've had these clients go and have sex, have that experience, and then be like, oh, nothing happened. I'm the same person. It was fine. The earth didn't open up and swallow me. And I've had so many people go through that exact set of steps. Like, I did the sex thing, and I woke up and was still me. And they're kind of like, that was kind of anticlimactic sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's one example. But I mean, other things that I've seen people do are come out as either queer or not cisgender. I've seen people have wonderful sexual communication with partners. I have people that have like opened their marriages, people that have really taken control of their sexual health in ways that felt really daunting to them. Some women I've worked with have had pelvic floor issues, pain with sex, vaginismus, like the inability to even have intercourse because of the like tightness, and have tackled that head on and are like getting past it. So I've seen so many things that are absolutely worth the work that it takes to get there. And none of it's going to happen overnight. It's a long game. It's a process. But I always tell people that like, it doesn't matter when you make these changes. Like, it's never too late. You have decades of life ahead of you. I even had a woman buy my sexual values workbook, and I think she said she was 80 and had like gotten out of a cult. And I'm like, good for you, girl. Like, live your next 20 years as a sexually freer person. Make your own mind up. Yeah.
I love that. I'm sorry. I'm just picturing this 80-year-old client of yours. I'm like, you go, girl.
I know. I really like that one. Really got me. I mean, I didn't work with her one-on-one, but she emailed me after purchasing my book. And I was just like, yeah, it's never too late to untangle this bullshit.
I love that. And I think part of the reason I am such a huge fan of what you do, other than obviously, like, first of all, being a woman in academia, which is also not allowed in a lot of the same ideological spaces that are, you know, advocating for literally bombing abortion clinics and violently attacking people who don't believe the same things that they do. Like, in that same space, it's so hard for women to even feel empowered enough to make career decisions, or to like open certain books that their husband doesn't want them to read, or to spend time reading. I had to fight tooth and nail to finally be taught how to drive at 22 years old, because these places are so stuck like several centuries ago. So I'm just a fan that you went and you did the damn thing, and you got your master's degree and then some, and you've been like working relentlessly with people who do not see you as a real human being sometimes at first. And then you let people make their own decisions. You like continue that process for them. I think I'm really comfortable talking to you because you don't demand that people leave their belief system and come all the way to your side of the spectrum on all of these issues. Like that in and of itself speaks volumes, that you want to teach people to trust themselves and like trust their own decisions.
Yeah. I don't want to create clones of my belief system. Like, if you come out of working with me and you are still like, I do very much value monogamous commitment, and I do think sex is very sacred, like, that's fucking awesome. Like, live those values for yourself. And I do also teach people how to be sex positive, which to me doesn't mean going out and doing all kinds of sex things. It's just believing that people should be able to make up their own minds about their own sexuality. And you don't have to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum to reject purity culture and to reject your upbringing around sexuality. Like, you don't have to start going to sex parties and having orgies. Like, I don't care if you ever have sex. It's just like, just let go of those beliefs and recognize that other people get to make their own decisions too.
If you made it this far in the episode, I want to thank you so much for your undivided attention. There are so many things you could be doing right now, and you're spending time listening to me and my friends. I love that. I love that for us. So I want to give you a chance also to participate in this conversation and have some say in future episodes of this podcast. I would love to read your comments, questions, concerns, suggestions, reactions, memes, dirty jokes, whatever you want to send me. You can hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. My handle is the same for all of those platforms. You can find me at Faith Yen, FAITHY3N. That's Faith Yen, FAITHY3N. This podcast also has its own Patreon page. So if you want to donate $5 a month to contribute directly to upping the quality of what you're listening to right now with some snazzy new equipment, maybe like a studio quality interview service designed specifically for podcasts, I don't know, throwing some ideas around, you can find Cults, Magic, and Misinformation at patreon.com/cults, magic, misinfo. That's patreon.com/cults, magic, misinfo, spelt exactly how you see it in the cover art for this podcast. I also want to give Erica a chance to describe everything that she's offering on her website right now, which again is purityculturedropout.com.
The Purity Culture Dropout program is an intensive, like, work with me one-on-one kind of thing. And if you're interested in that, you can email me directly. My email is ericasmith.med@gmail.com, or you can put your name on the waiting list that you can find on my website, which is purityculturedropout.com. I also do just like one-on-one sessions with people where you don't have to make a commitment to a bunch of intensive work. You can find more info about that on my website too. So if you're like, I just need to talk to you for an hour, that's cool. I do have a number of classes that I have done, like webinars that are recorded and for sale on my website. There's a one about Sex Ed 101. There is everything you need to know before you have sex for the first time. There's casual sex and dating for purity culture dropouts. And the sort of subtext is that you can have casual sex that is very ethical and very healthy. There's one about sexual communication, one about pornography, which I just did last week, and another one for people who are LGBTQ or think they might be, who have come out of purity culture. And all those classes and the sexual values workbook are on my website. And I also, a couple times a year, run a support group for queer people who were raised in purity culture. And I'll be opening that back up again in late September. So if you're interested in that, the waiting list for that is also on my website.
Beautiful, beautiful. So you can do, like, you can show up in person and be there for the live Zooms that you do. And then you also have the option of going to your website and buying the recording later and the workbooks later.
Yep. I would love to have a members subscription area where people can talk, because my Instagram is fantastic, but I can't guarantee that it's going to be a safe space for everybody because it's an Instagram account. So a private space is my plan for the future.
I just want to thank you so much for working with people who have had vastly different experiences than you, and literally having that much empathy and compassion that you're willing to, like, make this your life's work. Like that, I have mad respect for that.
Thank you.
So
thank you so much. It's nice to hear in this environment where, like I said, other people would rather me shut the hell up. It's so nice to hear things like you just said. My big plan is that I want to write a book that is specifically geared towards sex ed for people raised in purity culture, because there's nothing like that out there at the moment. So I want to kind of distill everything I've created into, the sexual values workbook and all the classes kind of combined and put something out, like, for real, like with a publisher. That's that's what I'm excited about, thinking of doing that.
I am here for that. I want that book. I think it needs to be written.
Thank you so much. That's really good encouragement.
Well, that's all I got for you today, people. Solid first episode. My wish for you is that you have amazing sex. My wish for you is that the next time you run into a quote-unquote high-value alpha male who tries to tell you that you're not a real woman if you don't... I hope you tell him to get fucked by someone else. If at all. You feel me? Okay. I'm getting out of here. Bye.